The unrelenting and continuous gratuitous onslaught on the bodies of women has led gender activists to no other conclusion but to describe the war on women's bodies as a pandemic. And that is the conversation we're having tonight. Over the past 30 years, the country has seen an indiscriminate maiming and violation of women, with many losing their lives. Good evening. Welcome to Democracy 30. My name is Oliver Dixon. And as we proceed with our Women's Month focus, tonight we ask the question, why has South Africa seen such a high level of gender-based violence over the past 30 years? Joining me to understand this is Jabulile Maseko, who's a social worker, and with the NGO, You Are Not Alone. Dieketseng Diale from the Lady of Peace Foundation, which approaches gender-based violence from a peace and security perspective. And we're also joined by Dr. Mfanozelwe Shozi, the former chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality, who's currently with Sonke Gender Justice. But before we get into the conversation, take a look at this.
Since the rape and murder of 19-year-old Uyinene Mkhejana in 2019, that sparked mass marches across the country. There have been so many more women that have been killed at the hands of men.
The cold-blooded violence that President Cyril Ramaphosa is referring to is one of the most prevalent human rights violations in South Africa, gender-based violence. For decades, South Africa has ranked as one of the most dangerous in the world for femicide and intimate partner abuse perpetrated against women of all races and class. It has been estimated that a woman is killed in South Africa every 4 hours, and at least half of them murdered by intimate partners.
He poured a 5 liter of paraffin. Then he lied. He locked me inside the house. Then when I asked why is he doing this to me, he didn't respond. He just closed the door and left me inside burning. I'm asking for forgiveness. I don't know what we have done wrong. But guys, please, please forgive us. Forgive us.
In 2020, the World Health Organization estimated 12.1 in every 100,000 women in South Africa are victims of femicide each year. This is 5 times higher than the global average of 2.6 in every 100,000 women. Although the dawn of democracy in 1994 brought an end to the structural violence of apartheid, its reverberations are still felt, and violence continues to assert itself in intimate relationships, families, and communities. President Ramaphosa, in his commendation of the National Strategic Plan, stated that the unacceptable high levels of GBV are a blight on South Africa's conscience and a betrayal of the hard-fought constitution. But despite these policies being introduced, it seems as if this fight is far from over, and the question remains, will gender-based violence ever be a thing of the past? For Democracy 30 on SABC News, I am Tseho Fatso Magolego.
And we now turn to our guest as we try to unpack why it is that South Africa remains a deeply violent country on the bodies of women. Dieketseng, I want to start the conversation with you, and thank you so much for joining us. The South African news landscape and the news cycle is filled with a cacophony of reportage around the killings of women, the raping of women, and oftentimes by close, intimate partners. And while those may seem anecdotal, not all of these stories rise to the surface. Perhaps describe to us what the conditionality is of the average South African woman today living in a constant fear of violence. Dieketseng, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, that question was for you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, and good evening to your viewers. And indeed, yes, this scourge of gender-based violence is very, very and unfortunate, and it's really linked to deeper problems that we are faced in our country. And as it has been, flighted on your screens right now, of the history of where we come from, looking at the issue at hand, which is now gender-based violence and femicide. These aren't just random acts of violence. They are tied to deeper problems in our society. And it's important for us to, look at how, as South Africa, we can better understand this challenge as a community. So from a peace building perspective, it is about changing how we live together. Yes, intimate partner relations, we see that these cases are really linked to such. So building peace is not just about ending fights. It's about changing the way we live together. And it is important for us to bring this work as a community, starting with individuals, because we do start from a belief that peace begins with me and peace begins with you. And therefore, it is important that we help individuals, starting from the household, to bring new conversations around peace values that will help us to build this society and strengthen the cohesion from the household with what we call domestic peace. So
can I pause you there? Can I pause you there? I just want to double click in on that. And I think, framing the conversation from a peace perspective is very interesting, because it means that there's a general lack of peace, perhaps the overall presence of violence. And if I'm understanding you correct, please help me if I'm not, is South Africa a generally deeply violent country, and it just so happens that violence is also exercised on women, or is South Africa a country that exercises violence specifically on women because they're women, rather than it being an overall lack of peace problem?
So South Africa comes from a very difficult past. Over 400 years, we are a nation that is living trauma, right? So there is generational trauma. And I would, at this point in time, latch on to the efforts of women-led organizations like the South African Women in Dialogue, SAWID, which has really galvanized women to start a healing process that helps us as South Africa to debunk and to look at how we can deconstruct this hurt, this trauma that we have now lived through. So organizations like that and many other, which are now from a mental health institutions and organizations that are helping us to recognize where the hurt is coming from, because what we see happening is that hurt people are hurting people, right? And therefore it's important that we unlearn these kind of behaviors and put a new agenda that will help us to look at programs that not only just stop
Mediana, can I just pause you there, because I do want us to speak about programmatically what it is that we can do. But Dr. Shores, I want to bring you in here. Oftentimes it is women that lead the efforts on mobilizing, organizing, and advocacy work in trying to overcome the scourge of gender-based violence. But it's not women that are often the perpetrators. They are on the victim end of the spectrum. One, why is it that we're not seeing more men lead the conversation around why men are violent and how to change the behaviors and attitudes of men? And then maybe also to ask the question, why is it that South African men are so deeply violent towards women?
Thank you very much, Oliver. It's a fact that men are violent. If you just want to check go to the prison and check that there are more men in prison than women. And there are some who are perpetrators who have never even seen prison. This is linked on a number of issues, Oliver. South Africa have high levels of murder and rape. You know, the right to life in South Africa is something that we all desire for, but we are not respecting right to life. There are other various other violations like xenophobia, homophobia, violence against women, gender-based violence, student protest, political violence, sexual violence, gang violence, gender-based violence, we call it cross-section mafia, public violence. Almost all those types of violence, when you look at them in the main, are really perpetrated by men. So men are really a problem. And I think it's important that we must make sure that we change the culture on how men are raised. Even men that are in the church, it's violence, they're cultural men as well are so violent and so on. So in all the stratas, and I think maybe it goes to the issue of how we bring up men, the issue of socialization, the issue of our education system, and the issue of how society perceives men and how patriarchy treats men and as opposed to women. And I think that is critical, and we must make sure that as a country we find new ways of actually engaging men to understand that women are human beings, treat them as human beings, and respect their bodies as well. We must not just treat human bodies as trash and women bodies as trash. We must always respect women as women, and women as decision makers, as women as leaders as well. So we must also, as men, accept that women are leaders, and we must also follow them.
Yeah. Jabulile, describe to us, in the line of work that you do, what the day-to-day lives of women who are victims of gender-based violence looks like.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. You know, women come in our offices every day crying about the abuse, rape, the beating. You know, this thing it shows that our men are angry out there. It goes back to what Dr. said, Dr. Shoza said, how we raise our boy child. We need to look at the ways, how are we going to raise our boy child in these coming 30 years.
Yeah. What is it that we're doing wrong when it comes to raising boy children in this country?
The inequality. Like now we are saying our boys can only just sit and watch television or play games in our television, while our girl child has to do the house chores, cleaning, and do everything.
Yeah.
You know, when the girl child get a chance to study like a boy child. You know, the inequality, that's why we have the high rate of unemployment in women than in men.
Yeah.
So that's the issue. That's why now our women normalizing staying in a toxic environment just because they are unemployed. They need to feed their children. They need to be there for themselves for money. You know, not just for being loved. They're being abused daily.
Yeah. Look, we're going to come to the question around what it is that we can do at a policy level to get the problem solved. Don't go away. We're going to take a short break. On the other side of this, we continue the conversation. And welcome back to Democracy 30. Today we ask the question, why have we failed to overcome gender-based violence in South Africa over the last 30 years? Before I go back to our guests, let's have a look at one of perhaps the most insidious forms of violence exercised against the bodies of women, and that is sexual violences. I want you to take a look at this graph over here, which gives us an overview of sexual violence between the years 2022 and 2023. Various forms of sexual violence: rape, sexual assault, attempted sexual offenses, and contact sexual offenses. Rape is so incredibly high that one has to ask, is there a concerted effort being made to be able to overcome rape. In a single calendar year, 42,780 women were raped in South Africa. 42,780. 7,483 various others experienced sexual assault. Overall, more than 53,000 women in South Africa have experienced, in that single year, some form of sexual violence. Perhaps to come to you, Diketseng, and ask you this question. From a policy perspective, where did we miss the mark over the last 30 years? Did we start our democratic program at the right starting point around questions around violence, and specifically, like we saw just now, sexual violences?
Thank you so much for the question. So from a policy perspective, I think South Africa has done well for itself, although there is still much work to be done. I mean, dating from 1991, 1994, where there was a women, action, a national peace accord, which was now organized by women. In 1999 to 2004, there was a national peace table that was formed, and there was a whole discussion around how do we make sure that women are treated equally. And I know from your past, episode, you spent a long time talking about the kind of policies or frameworks regionally, internationally, and nationally that we made reference to. Now, I want us to look at how South Africa has played a role in after the total shutdown movement. There was a call for the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, and equally, South African women, led by civil society, went into advocating for the implementation, or the development rather, of the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security as a United Nations Security Council 1325 that says every country that is at war must have this National Action Plan. And we know that South Africa is not really at war, but we are at war with this gender-based violence, and especially women who are, whose bodies are hurt. So we need to take stock of the kind of implementation, coordination that we are having as
Can I pause you there, because
country.
That question is incredibly important, and I want to put it to you, Dr. Shozi. From a policy perspective, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what have we managed to implement at all?
Thank you very much for that. One of the critical issues is implementation. For me, each and every police officer, if a woman comes to a police station and reports something, it needs to be investigated. You must actually put people behind bars. You can't even relate that to culture, to religion, to any other source. So if we can improve on implementation, all police officers, they understand what is supposed to
So
be
our
done.
failure is not a policy failure, it's an implementation failure.
From where I'm sitting, there could be gaps in policy, but it's on implementation. When you look at, with the time when I was the city, I remember with about 38 legislation, now there are about 14 or 41 that are actually trying to deal with gender-based violence and violence against women issues. So yes, let's improve policy, but the most important thing that we must do is to improve an implementation. Make sure that with prosecutors who can actually prosecute on gender-based violence issues, understand the issues. We must have police officers who understand issues of femicide. We have agencies when women are actually reporting this. We have families who are not supporting perpetrators, who always put perpetrators behind bars and support people being prosecuted. So for me, implementation is also critical. We must also respect international instruments. As a country, we must make sure that we report on CEDAW, we report on Maputo protocols, we actually take recommendations from our own international instruments seriously and ensure that we advance that. So for me, that is very, very critical, and make sure that implementation, we must up our games in terms of implementation. Look, you
Yeah.
actually put up the stats of about 42,000, 53,000, and so on. There are more women who have not reported such cases.
Absolutely.
Who are bleeding inside. So the magnitude of this problem is very big.
Yeah, Jabulile, you're on the ground doing the work, being you in the homes, you're in the communities. Where, from your vantage point, how do you feel your work could be supported more from a policy perspective, from an institutional perspective, that will help you to be able to support more women, but also to have more women come forward so that we have a better sense of the scale of the problem?
Yeah, on my ground, we are working at VFRs, which is a victim-friendly room at police stations. Yeah, that's part of the implementation comes from the government side, where we are implementing the NSP. So what is needed there is more social workers to be hired. Also, the resources, we need also to have police that understand the scope of GBV. You know, we cannot have men who are angry at the front desk speaking to women. Because if a woman comes there and is being raped or is being violated by a man, there comes an angry man who's also going to victimize the same woman. Do you think that woman can come back and report the case? No. So we need to have people who are passionate about what they are doing at the police station too. We need police who understand the pain that women are going through, not understanding their pains, which we don't know about. We need police also to get healing, you know, because, you know, maybe you are hurt also, you have your trauma, childhood trauma, and you are there to help another person who is hurt. That anger that you are going to give to that woman is totally unacceptable. So we need policemen who are trained and who are passionate about doing the work.
Absolutely. On the other side of this, we ask the question, why is it that South African men are so deeply angry? Given very specifically that South Africa is not the only patriarchal society on the face of the earth, but one of the most violent societies on the earth. That's on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Democracy 30. We're taking a look, a deep dive into the state of violence against the bodies of women. And we've been having a fantastic conversation. Just perhaps to wrap it up here, Dr. Shozi, in a minute, can you perhaps answer this question for me? There's been various parts in the conversation where men in South Africa have been described as angry. Earlier on, you used the word patriarchal society. We're not the only patriarchal society. But why are men here angrier than other parts of the world? What is so unique about South Africa that brings about this conditionality?
The KZN Department of Social Development hosted a seminar on why men are angry, and men reflected on a number of issues about some of this. One of the critical issues is men's health. Men don't take care of their own health, and sometimes it affects them, and they use force sometimes when it's not actually desired. One of the critical issues is psychological and psychological issues that men don't deal with, which I think the state must also provide psychological services. The other issue as well that links to that is that when we talk about gender-based violence and femicide, we only touch on physical violence, and there's a magnitude of physical violence as well as psychological violence and economic violence. Economic and psychological, we don't even talk about it. So men are angry, and I think they are misdirecting their angerness to women, and it's critical that they need to actually be helped in terms of getting professional help and sometimes spiritual help, so that they're able to actually deal with their own anger. And their anger emanates from various issues. We come from a history of faction fighting, of political violence, and issue of poverty and so on. So I think men need to be assisted to deal with those issues. They must also understand that even if they have those problems, they must never release their energies to the bodies of women. They must also need help. They need to be assisted to to deal with those
Absolutely.
things. So
Yeah.
it's very, very critical that we must also engage men. And we need to actually bring traditional leaders, our own leaders, need to bring in our politicians to assist. We need to have a program of peace, as DK Seng has said, that will deal all the interconnections of violence in this country. So that the case we are able to have a program of peace that is dealing with all types of violence, so that we are able to actually deal with this violence, and we must be able to think peace, not to think violence, and talk about violence every day. And it's important we must also talk about peace and be able to actually deal with issues of violence and have a peaceful country and respect the right to life of women and men.
Can I just pause you there? DK Seng, I want to ask you this perhaps. South Africa's democracy is maturing. You're saying we need a program of peace. Describe to us what those steps look like today that affects the next 30 years of our democracy.
Thank you so much. So for us to build a peace and GBV-free society, number one, focus on healing and justice. Number two, make peace building fair to everyone. And maybe three, as a very critical one, teach nonviolence. And this is now especially to young people about nonviolence and respect. Work on programs that teach people how to resolve conflicts without violence. And as Dr. has said as well, educating youth on human rights and nonviolent communication. Number four, strengthen local institutions, which is important. I think Jabu who raised it, that our police, and as well as our courts needs to be, capacitated. They and ultimately become strong and operate on fairness. So working together to build peace, we all need to work really as individuals, in households, in the communities, in the street corners, and street committees, where we are building peace clubs. As an example, in Tembisa, where we met Yana, we were actually helped by Sonke Gender Justice to actually bring a campaign that latches on, teaching peace from primary schools and so on. So we need to also encourage our men to be peacemakers. Boys and men, that they must stop the fight against GBV as well, challenging harmful behaviors and supporting gender equality. And we do see some men also doing that. We just need to scale up and empower our communities so that they have, they are the ones who actually have the power to create the change. And this, we are doing it through various means. The last but not least of the steps that we can take is to recognize the contribution that is done by individuals and by organizations who are using meager resources to make this difference. Non-bystanders, award them. Have a reflective moment.
I'm unfortunately going to have to pause you, but thank you so much. I think you've given us a concrete step of plans that we can do right away, and some of it don't need major policy interventions. I do want to thank all of my guests this evening, DK Seng Diale, as well as Dr. Mfanozelwe Shozi, as well as Jabulile Maseko for joining us this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're back with you next week at 8 p.m. for another installment of Democracy 30. My name is Oliver Dixon. Good night.